Okay. Well, first of all, good morning. My name is Julio Gomez. My colleague Carolina Suarez and Daniel Lopez. We are representing Econometria Consultores in this workshop from theory to action, enhancing public policy evaluation through TBE, theory-based evaluation approach. First of all, we appreciate very much the time and the disposition of you being here. If you have any questions during the presentation, please feel free to put it in the Q&A questions, and then we will be trying to answer along the presentation. And perhaps at the end of it, we can have a discussion around that. So as I was mentioning, this workshop is concentrating on the theory-based evaluation approach in public policy evaluation. I want to start with this quote, which is from Carl H. Weiss. She was an American sociologist, and she was specialized on education and evaluation. And I think the quote is very central to what we want to say and what we're gonna discuss today, which is that every program is based on an underlying theory about how and why the program will work. And I think this is very central to what we're gonna discuss today. Second. Here we go. Okay, so who are we? Well, Econometria Consultores is a Colombian consulting firm with more than 47 years of experience. Our main core of action is social and economic analysis and studies, with over 1,000 studies developed and finished in over 20 countries and with over 300 clients. We do pride ourselves in using an approach or a mixed method approach that is a combination of quantitative and qualitative methodologies towards any evaluation or any endeavor that we take, as well as a multidisciplinary team with qualified members, which is that quality seal that we put to the work that we do every day. We do have currently 5 long-term agreements with UN agencies to conduct different evaluations. So we have UNICEF from January 2023 to January 2028. We have OCHA from 2024 to 2028. ILO, again, from January 2024 to December 14th, 2026. We have FAO from December 2023 to January 2028. And then we have the World Food Program for both centralized evaluations and decentralized evaluations from 2021 to 2026. And this is kind of like one of we do work with other agencies, both private and public agencies and institutions, but this is like the main core of the work that we are doing with the UN. Why is this? Our main services in this matter, what we do in the day-to-day, we do market analysis and business plans, macroeconomic and sectorial analysis, as well as organizational analysis, plan, programs, and project designs, design methodologies, information and monitoring systems, diagnosis studies, evaluation in general, regulation, review, and design, as well as financial analysis and economic evaluation, and the design of public policy guidelines and directives. I think this umbrella kind of like has all of the main core of business that we do here at Econometria Consultores. So now this was like kind of like the first part, introducing what Econometria Consultores is, and now we're going to go forward to the theory-based evaluation workshop. The workshop is divided in 5 big steps. First of all, the TBE overview. We're going to discuss why does public policy need theory? What is the theory-based evaluation? What are the basic methodological aspects to take into account, and some theory dimensions within the theory-based evaluation? Then we're going to give a context of a program that we're going to use as an example for our practical exercise. We're going to go after that, we're going to break up into different rooms, and we're going to reconstruct a specific program, this program's a specific part of its theory of change. in groups to be able to have that practical approach towards TBE. Finally, we're going to compare and contrast the different rationales behind the exercise of the different groups. And finally, we're going to present the actual theory of change that is used in that evaluation for that specific program by Econometria Consultores. So first of all, why does public policy need a theory or need and to go beyond that black box? So we have to take into account first that public policies are usually or any intervention are usually multi-component, multi-level, and are politically accountable, and they should respond to a specific context. And then this complexity kind of like works together to address a specific issue and aims to address a specific issue through the interactions of these components and these different actions towards that specific goal or that specific outcome. And then in this sense, we have like two different visions. First of all, being that black box evaluation approach, and then the core of this presentation, which is the theory-based evaluation or TBE. So basically, the black box approach focuses on inputs and final outcomes, but ignores the complex dynamics that happens within that black box and the contextual realities that happens in the context where the public policy or the intervention or the program is taking place. It evaluates and assesses the intervention without making explicit the rationale behind it and the assumptions, as well as the mechanisms of change that will happen within that black box. So it concentrates a lot on just the inputs and how and what outcomes at the end it kind of like shows at the end of the cycle. And then they have this black box in the middle with no explicit theory, no explicit mechanisms or assumptions. And then this approach might fall in the misunderstanding that public policies are universally applicable, which are not. And they depend a lot on the context and the population needs and the specific environment where policies or interventions are going to take place. Then the other approach, which is the one that we're going to concentrate today, is the theory-based evaluation. The TBE builds up a theory of change and explains how the interventions produce change in a specific context. This how being the specific steps and assumptions and the context that should work together towards or to achieve that change. It also makes the causal logic and assumptions explicit in the evaluation, and it aligns policy rationale with the specific context. So that black box kind of like we dive into, or TBE dives into that black box that sometimes is not as specific, and then we analyze each one of the issues within it. It also responds to diverse but specific needs and realities of the specific population and context, enabling for learning good practices. And then in this sense, we're able to escalate and implement in similar places or in similar contexts, as well as identify what are the difference or the specific things that work for each context. And it makes it easier to adapt it to different contexts as well. So what is theory-based evaluation? So theory-based evaluation basically in this sense aims to understand not only what worked and what outcomes resulted, but also how, why, for whom, and very important, under what circumstances the actual theory works. It could be, or we could understand it as the social science adaptation of value change, of chains and productive processes, which is how different stages and different dynamics within those stages kind of like work together towards a final goal. TBE is an evaluation that aims to understand the logic behind the intervention and the contribution of each of the stages and each of the elements of that theory of change, and how the causal inference between them kind of like works together. So you have causal inference, you have the contribution logic of the different stages of the theory of change, and then you have with this two, or analyzing this two, you have how the interventions make change, what is the explicit model behind that change, what are the assumptions and the rationale behind that change or behind that context, and what are the sequential pathways, which are the route in which these elements should work together to achieve the change that is expected, or to achieve or address the dynamics that the program or the policy wants to address. Again, it focuses a lot on causal contribution, and it uses a systemic validation with stakeholders and with the program logic itself to understand these underlying assumptions. So some basic methodological aspects to take into account when addressing an evaluation through TBE is, first, we need to reconstruct or construct a theory of change. So this construction or reconstruction maps the expected route or the expected pathways, outcomes, assumptions, and the context factors that serves as the basis of the evaluation. And then we use it to revise it, reconstruct it, and at the end to support decision making and improving public policy evaluation. You do have to take into account as well the causal mechanisms of analysis. Here we identify how and why the intervention is expected to work. So we have the motivations, the incentives behind, as well as the expected institutional shifts or the expected outcomes that we want to, or the client wants from the intervention. We do have to take into account as well context dynamics that examines under what conditions those mechanisms actually work, by recognizing that the mechanisms might differ in different contexts, and might in some context it might work in a specific instrument or a specific activity that might not work in a different context. And it ties a little bit to this argument of how public policies are not universally applicable to every single context. And finally, it's the idea of contribution analysis. So we cannot, by the theory-based evaluation or by a theory of change, say that a specific activity is statistically significant with a specific change, or it causes 100% like causal effect. But you do have this contribution analysis on how each of these aspects kind of like contributes to that final outcome.
Julio, excuse me. Yeah. Are you still with presentation? Because we're not seeing it.
Oh, you're not seeing it?
No.
It should be. Now you see it?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. So for the theory dimensions, kind of like this slide shows the sub-theories that interact to create the final theory of change. And I want you to see it as kind of like an equation. So the sum of these sub-theories and how at the end they become that big theory of change, which is the one we should use for the evaluation. So first of all, we have the program sub-theory, which is basically the overall logic of why the policy or the intervention is expected to work. And the TBE evaluates if there is a causal model that links that overall logic. Then you have the implementation sub-theory, which is how the intervention policy actually delivers the change. So it's the actual process behind the plan, the process the program or the policy has in place to actually deliver and create the change. And the TBE checks whether the implementation enables those causal pathways that we're identifying both on the implementation and the program sub-theory. Then we have the triggering mechanisms, the mechanisms or the instruments that actually produce the change. So this could be incentives, norms, motivations, or different instruments that policies and interventions and programs use to produce that change or to be part of that process. And finally, being the action sub-theory, which are the choice of specific activities that would trigger those mechanisms. So what we have here is we have a set of actions that would trigger the mechanisms that we planned. those mechanisms and those actions should be part of a specific process that's planned to actually deliver the change that one or the intervention wants to achieve. And finally, all of this uh, mechanisms, the actions, and the process should be tied to the overall logic of the intervention. And then the sum of these four elements kind of like has the or becomes the theory of change, which is the integrated framework that connects all of the above. And the TBE, what does is that it organizes, it tests, and it revises the full causal pathways that or the interactions between these sub theories. So we have been discussing and we've been talking about the theory of change, but what is actually theory of change within the context of theory-based evaluation? Basically, the theory of change can be both a hypothesis if you're constructing a theory of change or a tool of analysis, and it is used to test, identify assumption, and the breakpoints of the chain of change, basically. So if you're constructing a theory of change from zero, then you're hypothesizing how the different elements that you have of a context or of a program or of a potential intervention can work together towards a specific goal. And then if you're reconstructing, then you're using what the program already has to reconstruct and to analyze through it. A robust theory of change should include causal links between the activities, the outputs, and the outcomes of the theory of change. It should have explicit the mechanisms of change, which are the activities and also the instruments that we're going to use or that the intervention is going to use to assess the problem. We do have to take into account the assumptions, which are part of the outputs. They're also part a little bit of the context, of the general context of the intervention, but assumptions are more linked to the inputs and to the reality of the inputs within the theory of change. And finally, we do have to take into account, which is something that detaches us a little bit from the black box approach, which is the contextual factors and how it affects and kind of like molds the intervention. And then in this sense, theory-based evaluation uses the theory of change to create evaluation questions, which should be tied to that theory of change, to every single or to the general rationale behind the theory of change. And by hence, it also affects or guides the data collection, not only in the instruments, but also in the specific or how to use specific questions to address specific issues. Finally, in the analysis and the interpretation of findings by using the questions that are already based on the theory of change and the data collection that is also based on the theory of change, then you interpret those findings through the same rationale behind that theory of change. So this is how kind of you link every single part of the evaluation to that theory of change that you have. And at the end, you either design a new theory of change if you're constructing it, and if not, then you refine the theory of change. So here we have some methodology phases for the theory of change. We have 5 main phases. Phase 1 being the reconstruction of the theory of change. Here we want to rebuild or build, depending on the assignment you have or the specific context of the intervention, the logic behind the intervention, and how it is expected to work and to lead to results over time. How do you do this at the practical level? You analyze project documents, policy plans, all secondary information that you have in place. You also can work with interviews and workshops with key stakeholders to understand the rationale behind the program, or to understand what are the basic activities, or to have like this sense and notions of the programs before or in the first part, as well as very important to visually map the causal pathways and the assumptions that one is identifying on the program. For phase two, you have the identification of assumptions and mechanisms. Here we want to really clarify what are those assumptions and which of those assumptions should hold to hold that causal pathways, and what mechanisms actually drive that change. Here we can, in a practical level, we can use structured discussions with the evaluation teams, as well as using previous research that are relevant to the intervention or to the topic of the intervention, as well as the use of context analysis and assumptions for taking into account or accounting for the specific contextual realities of where the intervention is taking place. The phase three will be the developing of evaluation questions, which basically we formulate questions that are directly linked to the theory of change. So this is linked to what I just said in the last slide, which is once you design those questions based and linked to the theory of change, you kind of start to get more information on those contextual factors, on those causal relations, and again, those areas where you have work to do or where you can, or areas of uncertainty. Again, you align those questions to the theory of change, and it's very important in this part to validate all the insights that you're getting through this process with the stakeholders that are relevant to the intervention, as this communication and this communication loop between the stakeholders and the evaluation team is very important for this approach. Phase four will be the gathering of evidence and analysis of evidence. In this case, we collect and interpret the data and assess whether those causal pathways and those assumptions that we identified on previous phases are actually holding and are actually working as they are expected to. Here is, we are very keen to say that it's very important for you to use mixed methods, to use focus groups, surveys, also the analysis of administrative data, to have a more robust kind of like data collection, and also to have this like triangulation or merge of information between quantitative information and qualitative, and to have like this holistic approach towards the evaluation of the intervention. And then finally, for phase five, we have the refinement of the theory and the socialization based on the findings that we have on the other phases. We confirm and we identified what specific parts of the theory of change were modified, were disproven, or hold. And then when we revise that theory of change or we design it, we present those findings through participatory sessions, and we develop, as well as after the socialization, the practical and theoretically informed recommendations for improvement of that specific intervention. So that's kind of like the pathway to assess the theory of change, and therefore the TBE. Okay, so in this slide, we want to show kind of like the different, and we're going to dive a little bit more into the dimensions along the theory of change, so we can see how in this image, it's from the National Department of Planning here in Colombia, and how in each stage of the theory of change, in inputs, in activities, in outputs and results, can be analyzed and entail different dimensions of evaluation. So for example, if you want to address efficiency, as it's more towards the inputs and how it's turned into outputs, while if you're concentrating more in effectiveness and impact, then you have to go more into the outcomes at the end, or the long-term outcomes of the theory of change. So this is kind of like how the different dimensions, like cost effectiveness, productivity, and efficacy, how they kind of like relate to the different parts of the theory of change, and how if one is like it helps a lot to concentrate and to focus and tailor evaluation to the specific needs of the client or the specific needs of the intervention itself. So if it's more important to assess productivity and efficiency, then you will kind of like look into the loop of inputs and activities and outputs. While if it's impact, then you have to see the whole thing. So this is kind of like assessing how, or this framework shows how the evaluation is not one size fits for all and it's not universally applicable. And it should match the specific, not only the specific context, but also the specific needs of the assignment that you have in hands. And then if you kind of like match this framework, then you're able to specifically plan what type of evaluation or what dimension you wanna take into account. So some pre-implementations assumptions for the TBE and for the theory of change. We have this is very important. Like there has to be a commitment to address a determined issue through a causal pathway. So whether you are designing the theory of change from zero or you're reconstructing the theory of change, there should be an idea that a change can be produced by the sequence of actions, outcomes, and contextual conditions, and they should be expected to work together towards a specific end. So that intervention explicitly, if you have already the theory of change in place, or implicitly, if you're going to construct it, there has to be this idea that number of things should interact together towards that end. There has to be sufficient access to program documentation, including program designs, documents, stakeholder insights, and existing monetary or administrative data. This third point is very important. There should be a willingness to challenge internal logics. If you already have if the intervention is already in place, you should be, or the stakeholders should be willing to revise these assumptions, to have this process of construction and discussions, and be open to reflective processes as well. Is very important for the TBE. And also there's kind of like an overwhelming need or overwhelming aim to explain and learn. And this should be central to the evaluation because the goal is not limited to understand or to verify whether the outcomes were actually met or not, but how these outcomes or how this change actually occur and under what conditions and through what mechanisms. So it's very important to have this or to aim to understand, to aim to learn the specific things of what happens inside that black box. For the design considerations, it's important to take into account that this approach addresses multi-level interventions. So if you have a multi-level, multilateral interventions, it's very keen to use. During the design phase, as I was mentioning before, we do need to reconstruct or construct or refine the theory of change. And we should be able to identify whether this causal change actually happens. And through the theory of change, we're able to focus the analysis and determine whether to conduct different types of evaluations, so operations, institutions, results evaluation, or depending on the specific part of the theory of change that you want to focus on. Again, it's important to have this engagement with the stakeholders, the relevant stakeholders, to have these feedback loops in real time during the intervention or during the evaluation. It is also very important that we do need that expertise on causal reasoning and time. Time here is very important because we do have to perform a rigorous test reviews. We have to unpack the mechanisms and anticipate potential unintended outcomes. So it's important if you're planning an intervention through TBE to take into account that test review time in your design. And as well, as I was mentioning before, we're really keen towards mixed methods. So we do think that to enrich methodological robustness and validity, it is very important to incorporate those mixed methods, quantitative and qualitative, both in data collection, in the analysis of information, and basically all over the different phases of the TBE, theory-based evaluation. Some general strengths and limitations, kind of like to kind of like have a general idea of what we've been discussing. So TBE explains not just what happened, but how and why and in what context it happens. It supports learning and adaptive policymaking. It captures complexity and variation. So, well, what I was mentioning of interventions that are multi-actor, multi-level, and that are context sensitive. It engages with stakeholders in the evaluation process, which is very important because you have this validity and this robustness of discussing your insights with the relevant stakeholders. And it also links evidence to strategic decisions for policymaking and policy refinement. Some of the limitations that we discussed before is it requires time, it requires sufficient data and analytical capacity. It's heavily depending on the quality of the theory of change. So whether you are designing a new theory of change or you're refining a theory of change, that quality of that theory of change or that analysis is very key for the theory-based evaluation, because it like if it's not well constructed, if it doesn't apply to the specific context, then you will have some of the insights are not correct. It can be complex to communicate to non-technical audiences. Nevertheless, in these times, most of the public are more related to how processes work and how like value chains analysis kind of work, but this is also very important for it. It does the fourth one is it does not provide a definition of attribution. It focuses a lot of on contribution, which is what I was saying at the beginning of the presentation of how we cannot statistically say that that A causes B, but we do have this analysis of how much A can contribute, A, B, or E can contribute to Z, basically. So that's the kind of a limitation, but also I think that's important for the evaluation. And then we do have the risk of confirmation bias if the theory of change is not critically validated with the stakeholders, as I was mentioning before. Some other uses of the theory of change. Here, what we wanted to show is how a well-structured theory of change allow us to design different evaluations depending on the focus. So if you're gonna focus on the inputs, you kind of have like operation evaluation. Process will be processes and products, get a little bit of institution evaluation, and products, it's more results. And then if you concentrate on from inputs to products, will be that executive evaluation that has operation, institutional analysis, and results, but it doesn't have that dimension of impact evaluation that does have the results at the long term. So we kind of like wanted to show here that not all of the evaluations or not all of the processes are all the way to impact evaluation, but we do have some smaller evaluations that could also be based on this theory of change or these theory-based evaluations to be able to tailor it to the specific needs. And this approach ensures that the evaluation efforts are targeted, are relevant, and are coherent with the specific needs. So this was kind of like the first part of the presentation, which was the theoretical part. I'm going to go forward to the kind of like the example of the program that or the project we're going to use for the practical exercise. Yes, Carolina.
Julio, I don't know if we can open the microphone for if someone has any question about the theoretical part, or if you want to write your questions in the questions
Q&A.
chat.
Yeah, if anyone has a question that wants to say it out loud, you're more than welcome. And if you want to put it in the Q&A as well, just let us know. I just can't see the question because I'm seeing the presentation, so just let me know if there's a question.
Yeah, Julio, this is Mohammed.
Yep.
Yeah, just a clarification, please. In one of the slides that you mentioned that there is a need for triangulate findings across methods.
Mm-hmm.
So we understand triangulation in terms of data collection, but what does it mean to do the triangulation across methods for the findings, not for the data?
So what we do here in econometria, we have something called evaluation matrix, and then that's like the basics of of any of the projects that we use. So different dimensions that could be understood from quantitative side and also from qualitative side, kind of like are embedded in that same matrix. So when you not only gather the information using that matrix and using those dimensions that you want to fulfill with both methodologies, but at the end, when you have the information and you kind of like use this matrix as a guide to analyze, then you kind of like have this like a holistic view. You don't only have this like the two sides of the coin. So you have the quantitative insights that give you the quantitative instruments, but you also have what's behind that number or what's behind that quantitative kind of like dynamics, and you explain it through the qualitative side. So once you have those two questions and those two methods within the same matrix, then you're able to analyze it in the kind of like in a merged way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you.
I saw another one, I think.
Hi, yes, I have a question. Can you hear me well?
Yeah.
Yeah, hi, Julio. Thank you so much for this presentation. My name is Sabrina. I'm a student evaluator, and with my team, we are applying contribution analysis for our practicum project, and we're about to start the data collection. But my question is more for the analysis piece. We're not there yet, but I read about the relevant explanation finder, the REF framework, which is like to help identify and examine the different factors and alternative explanation in the context of contribution analysis. And I wonder if you had heard of that practical framework, or what, pieces of advice do you have to provide in terms of how do we analyze, the data when we are at that stage of when we're at that stage. We're conducting survey. So, mixed method survey and key informant interviews. So just wanted to get your views on that. Thank you so much.
Okay, so first of all, I haven't heard of the actual method, but given that you have a surveys and you have you say it was interviews or
interviews, yeah, exactly.
So you have surveys and interviews, but both like from the beginning, you should have the questions that are going through the survey and the questions that are going in the interviews should respond to a specific dimension. So if you're looking to cost effectiveness, so if you have that matrix and both of the instrument, both qualitative and quantitative, are tied to the same dimension, then you're able to say, okay, this quantitative part tells me a bit of the story, and then the qualitative part kind of like fulfills what the number doesn't tell me, or doesn't, or the underlying dynamics that are happening that might explain me this number that I'm getting in the quantitative part of it. So I think it's more like that, like have that vision of both instruments should work and should be able to respond to a specific dimension or a specific question, and then you're able to address it through a mixed method approach. Caro?
Thank you, Julio. I just want to join the two questions because I think it's interesting that within the theory of change, we can triangulate elements. So we can understand some results of one of the stages, reflecting of the results of other part of the chain. What the theory of change allows us is to organize the logic of the intervention very well and understand it very well, so that the evaluation will follow the same logic from the design to the analysis. So we can, as Julio said before, we can organize the elements that we want to assess in the evaluation. We can organize in the same way the questions or the instruments or the people we were going to ask for any part of the theory of change, and we can in the same way organize the analysis. And I think that when we can triangulate the elements inside the theory of change, we can also understand different things that happen inside the logical framework of the intervention. If we have some results, probably the bad results or the good results will be engaged with some part of the I don't know, the activities, for example, and we have to make an approach of the operation to understand some of the results or some of the impacts. That's what I wanted to clarify as well. Thank you.
So any other questions? We're good? Okay. Okay, so the general context of the program Visión Amazonía, in 2015, in the context of the Paris Summit, the governments of Germany, Norway, the UK, and Colombia signed a declaration of intent aiming to support the reduction of greenhouse gases emissions from human actions such as deforestation, forest degradation, and it set a line of actions towards advancing in restoration, adaptation, sustainable development, and low carbon solutions, low carbon initiatives, as well as interventions. So the intent the declaration of intent kind of like entailed two payment strategies to achieve its goal. First, a conditional monetary transfer attached to meeting specific policy milestones. And the second will be specific transfers tied to verified emission reductions at the national level. So this is like the big umbrella where the context takes place. And under this agreement, in 2016, the Colombian Amazon Vision Program was launched, which under the first strategy, which would be this conditional monetary attached to meeting policy milestones, it creates or it promotes the use of economic and financial incentives to conserve forests, encourage legal and sustainable forest management, as well as strengthen forest governance. The generalities of this program is it kind of like falls a little bit into the umbrella as well of the peace agreement with FARC here in Colombia, where some commitments regarding environmental services were created, as well as to address the overall conflicts that we have over land use in different parts of Colombia. And we have seen how deforestation in the Amazon has increased since 2017 at different levels and at different rates, but always kind of like increasing. So for this reason, the kind of like the program itself mapped some of the drivers and the reasons why we do have deforestation in the Amazon, first being the changing of the use of land from Amazon forest to unsustainable, extensive ranching practices or ranching or pastoral lands. Also the illicit activities, including illegal crops and illegal mining. And then this next one that is very, very linked to illicit activities, which are the non-planned expansion of transportation infrastructure, which is basically the roads and the different connectivity infrastructure that they use to take their product out of the jungle, basically. And also the extension of agricultural frontier into the restricted environmental protected areas. So in response to that, the program entails two different instruments, one being a conservation incentives, which is the Amazon Forest Incentive. It's a monetary transfer that it compensates local actors for the opportunity cost of avoiding agricultural expansion in areas where it's of conservation areas or of Amazon forest areas. Also, we have the second part, which is financial instruments, one being the Sustainable Productive Transformation Instrument, which is a credit line that promotes the change of illegally used or degraded ecological land towards restoration and transition to sustainable land use. And finally, the green financial instrument, which is kind of like a credit or a specific credit or products aimed to establishing commercial forestry plantation, supporting shifts of traditional livestock system, and financing aquaculture ventures using native Amazonian species. So this is kind of like the general things that we should take into account prior to our exercise, to our practical exercise. So I don't know if you have any questions on this matter. It's kind of like the general vision of the program that we should take into account for the next step. And then for the practical exercise, yes, Caro.
I just wanted to say that in this exercise, I know we're starting without something that Julio mentioned as key to reconstruct the theory of change, which is information. But the idea is to do a quick exercise that allows us to identify how the different elements of the theory of change are expressed or described through using some questions, some key questions. And if it's possible for any group that we're going to split the group into different rooms, and if it's possible for us to establish some connections between each box of the theory of change. And at the end, we're going to join again in the main room to discuss about our findings, trying to reconstruct the theory of change of Visión Amazonia, and to discuss a little bit how was the final theory of change of the project that we reconstruct with information and the theory of change that we here inside the different rooms we can make, trying to identify every box of the theory of change.
Oh. Sorry, we were having a discussion. We were just ending a discussion with Eileen and Julio.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's okay. I think we can share with the rest of the audience that it's challenging sometimes.
Yeah, it's not easy. And it's even more difficult when you don't have information. If we're trying to make the puzzle any context, it's difficult to trying to organize it. But the purpose of this part of the workshop is to, in fact, discuss all the things that we find inside the rooms. So,
and I guess like I'm also more used to the theory of change being done before even the program is identified. So we're saying there's this program out there. Let's go back and look at the theory about why it should work so that we know what to measure in terms of whether it worked or not. But I guess I normally would be doing this exercise just even before the program, the intervention is developed. So like to sort of look at some of the contextual factors that need to be considered when you're trying to introduce a program. Like you have to know who recipients are, who the stakeholders are, what are some of the what did I call it? Like the barriers and facilitators to implementation. So that's why I was sort of interested to be part of this discussion, but I do see it's kind of chicken and egg, what comes first.
Yeah, and also the assumptions that you have to make to start to organize the program.
Yeah, so yeah, let's see what other people's experiences are, but that's why it was a little bit frustrating to me in that, you know, it sort of started with this program or this program, and then trying to explain, well, you know, this is what needs to go in to lead to these activities that should produce these outputs and these outcomes, without really knowing who identified that program or that intervention in the first place.
Okay. So, Danny, can we move this one up, like the whole thing?
Yes, in a room, we reconstructed the theory of change. The discussion evolved around, but I don't see participants with me.
No, my question is, can we move this chart up there? No, right?
No.
Okay. Okay,
Sí
so let's.
deberíamos, pero
Pero ¿cómo?
¿Ya?
subir
Aquí es
todos
como
los...
subir el cuadro para que quede aquí cerca este.
Ajá.
Sí, pues, es que creo que no me dejan tocarlo. Ya lo desbloqueo.
O cópialo y pégalo arriba.
Ya creo que yo lo copié, espérate, lo corté, ya lo puedo hacer. Ah, ya, Daniel.
Okay.
Ahí está.
So now we have these two different ones. So for inputs in our room, we discussed that it might be forestry development plan, conservation agreement, and law and order conditions. While you have only socialization and great forest cover. Why did you put on inputs greater forest cover, Daniel? Why did you guys put greater forest cover and socialization on inputs? Or if someone in
Yes.
the group wants to discuss on that group.
In my group discussion, the socialization is necessary for the grid associativity,
Mhm.
and greater forest cover is a element property planning.
Okay, because we were discussing that perhaps greater forest cover would be an outcome of the actual program. So if the program is intended to um, kind of like receiving this monetary aid, if they don't advance on their agricultural or they don't advance their agricultural frontier, then an outcome would be more cover of forest in the Amazon. I don't know. Well, perhaps we will see in the final one what it is, but I think that's one discussion there. For activities, we have property visits. We do have that. Greater associativity. Why do you guys thought greater associativity would be an activity? Perhaps someone in the group, in the other group, could tell us. Ernesto?
Yes, I am same group with Daniel. So I ask well, no, but you ask something about the great forest cover,
Mm-hmm.
and why is an input? Maybe is input is the characteristic is something that you have, and the cover the Amazon you don't need more graded. So the extension about the Amazon is something that you have, and maybe it's the conservation that the other yeah, outcomes, other
Mm-hmm.
other process about these things. For this is the question about the great forest covered is input and not outcome. So this is
Okay,
the
so you're
part that
saying
yeah, I mean say is the more the outcome is the forest conservation, but do you have these things? There's the great forest covered, and do you have the a lot of
okay.
part of this? And the second is yeah maybe the relationship with outcomes. This is the part the reason, but the team choice the graded forest covered is the input.
Okay, so what I'm understanding is you're saying we already have as a fact the cover of the forest on the in the Amazon is something that you have. Okay, but the thing is that like one of the objectives of the program is to actually like like one of the problems that we have is that the agriculture frontier it's expanding more and more, right? So the forest cover is getting actually down, right? So it's not greater but down. But then if the program is actually working, then you also have not the extension of the agricultural frontier, but also these activities of adaptation, of re um not adaptation, but kind of like introducing sustainable options in those lands. So I think I don't think the program actually understands greater forest cover as an input, but we might see it at the end when we see the complete one. Um, because of that, because of what we're seeing is that the frontier is actually lowering the forest cover, and then the program is trying to address that. Caro.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that if we think the forest cover as the problem we have to solve or the problem we have to face is more clear than it is an outcome, because it's something that if I make something to change, I have to, it's supposed to um, make a greater forest cover. I think if we think about the Amazon forest like something that has solved a problem that you said before, Julio, the uh, the I don't know, the the affectation of the forest. So we, I think, as we discussed in our room, that's an outcome, because it's something that I want to happen if I make some things, if I make
Mhm.
I make some activities.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Let's go to activities. So you have property visits. We do have that. Property planning and higher income. Why did you guys put higher income on activities? Daniel or this one right here?
Sorry, but I can see the share the yeah the presentation and then take the picture. So the activities: property visits, greater accessibility, property planning, and higher income. Yeah, the the reasons why select these activities is more about the relationship with outcomes. Yeah, sorry, with outputs. So this is the part the property visit is more than the people know how there is the law to
Mhm,
preserve and conservation this space. And
mhm,
the greater associative is more about the organizations. It's the know, yeah, what the organizations it's in the part of the conservation about the Amazonas. And the other thing is the property planning is more about the know what is the context of the Amazonas in this place, and what is the necessities about the make the public policy and maybe the interventions, governmental interventions. So in the last is the higher income. It's more about the conserve the space, and maybe the some things about the agriculture, or the sales this space. I don't know. This more the thing of this is the part of the activities is about the relationship with outputs, and maybe the final story, what is the outcomes.
Okay. Well, on this sense, I think property visits are actually activities.
Okay.
But we have to take into account that the activities are more of the like the mechanisms you use to
Okay.
achieve the change. So I don't. Well, we discussed that greater associativity is more like a result, perhaps, an output. of the exercise rather than an actual activity or an actual kind of like mechanism you use, as well as higher income. Higher income would also be a result of something you do. We put property visits and we put payments for environmental services. So this is actually like when you pay something, you're acting, like your activity is to pay, right? And this will be like the mechanism. So it's very important to understand like the activities are what we use to produce that change, but not the change itself that results at the end of the exercise. I think that works for property planning. Well, property planning might be an activity, but I'm not sure if in the context of this program it would be an activity. You might you might have a program.
Estoy demasiado feliz. Estoy demasiado feliz.
So I'm not sure if it's an actual like an activity. You might have a program where the central activity is to execute those property plans or to have those that planning. But I don't see in this context if it being an activity, but more perhaps an output. But we can see it at the end. At the end of the exercise, but definitely higher income is not an activity for sure.
Okay. And I have a question of this point, and it's more about the context in the Amazonas. Is the program think the ban about the poverty, the private property in Amazonas is more about the public and the conservations for the old people and not the select groups of the poverty these laws.
No, I don't quite follow you. I mean, you can say it in Spanish and how.
Okay.
Actually, I think that we can switch to Spanish because the only English speaker is not
No.
in the room. So
No, there are a
podemos hablar
couple.
español.
No, hay un par. There are a couple of people, Spanish, English speaker. We have Nicole, and we have Samara.
Si quieres te lo explico de una forma como muy sencilla para
Eso.
poder y lograr
Dale.
traducirlo. Es que si existe en el contexto del Amazonas, existe un poco el que buscar prohibir la propiedad privada para privilegiar como que que sea de todos, vaya, para lograr la conservación.
No, es que allá no, o sea, like the thing is that in the Amazon, I was mentioned in my group or en mi grupo que no tenemos, o sea, no hay como una formalización de la tierra o un tema privado, no lo hay. O sea, por el contrario, lo que hay es una falta de presencia del Estado que permite que las organizaciones criminales y las organizaciones tomen control de esas áreas, más no hay un tema privado como de que haya empresas o digamos que no es el intent del programa, ¿no? Porque el programa es más hacia el campesino o hacia la persona que vive en la selva, que no extienda su frontera agrícola y se le paga por efectivamente no extender la frontera agrícola. Pero digamos que ese contexto no, o sea, creo que no cala con la realidad del Amazonas colombiano, por lo menos, o con lo que sea, o con lo que está pasando y lo que quiera atender el programa. Entonces, más que el programa, lo que quiere hacer es como la falta digamos, de llegada del Estado genera de que las organizaciones criminales puedan tener un control y haya una expansión de mayoritariamente economía ilegal. O sea, ahí no solamente hay cultivos de coca, pero también el tema de la ganadería y la minería son ilegales porque en ese lugar no se puede hacer eso, ¿sí? Entonces no son empresas privadas, sino son la ilegalidad la que de una manera u otra pues está generando ese tema.
Ok, y ya nada más como para concluir, entonces en el Amazonas no hay títulos de propiedad, es decir, nadie es dueño como de una parcela o de un cacho de tierra.
Exacto, pues precisamente Por eso property planning, que sería de una manera u otra esa formalización de la tierra, pues tendría que ser un output. O sea, tendría que ser como algo que sale del programa porque no está, digamos que embedded en la realidad.
Ok, gracias.
Okay, and bueno, I don't know if we go to the other one, to the final one, and then we just discuss that. Claro.
Dime.
¿Será
Which
que
one?
to this one?
Probably we can see the real theory of
The
change.
real one?
Yeah. If
Okay.
if you move to left
Great.
side
Are you guys
of the screen, yeah.
Are you guys there? I'm seeing it. So yo estoy viendo el original. ¿Ustedes no?
Sí.
Sí, 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 ya está.
Okay. So for context, we have law and order conditions. We have natural disasters. In my group, we put this 2 here. And then that's talks about like the Amazon context and how it kind of relates. Existence of other participatory programs and processes. We also put that in context, and the ease difficulty. So basically, this is kind of like what the context of the intervention is. Now, if we go back to the general outcomes at the end, we have the greater forest cover, which was the one we discussed at the beginning, and how this kind of it's like the end of the program and what we need to achieve, or the basic of what the program wants to achieve, as well as forest conservation. These were clearly two outcomes of that program. For the outputs, we have greater associativity, we have higher income, which is the one what we were discussing with ahorita con el tema de, with higher incomes. So it's an output, actually, it's not an outcome and it's not an activity. Productive structure consistence for FDP and FDH. This is also like something that results from the intervention. Property planning, we saw it as well as an output here, which is also that formalization of the land that we were discussing before. Then for activities, we have we all had property visits, conservation agreement. We did not have this one. And payments for environmental services, we did have that one in activities, and it's kind of like that, those mechanisms that you use to provide that change or to enable that change, basically. And then the inputs, we had we did have this too, and then the strengthening of organizations. I think we did differ on that sense. But basically, this is the actual theory of change that's being used for the Amazon Forest Incentives, which is one part of the Visión Amazonía project. So I don't know if any of the people here have questions on this matter, on this final one, or some insights that you maybe are not completely like or you don't completely agree with something in the theory of change or something. Bueno, creo que no tenemos más comentarios al respecto.
Muchas gracias.
Okay, thank you so much. Muchas gracias por atender, por estar en la reunión y por el tiempo y la disposición. Muchísimas gracias.
Gracias a ustedes.
Gracias, bye.
Estén bien.